Osborn from Darrenberg Winery in the McLaren Vale. It's an honour and a privilege to be able to talk to you. Thank you so much for joining me on the Cellar Door podcast. How are you today?
I'm great, Tom. Yeah, great to have a chat to you. Always enjoy a chat about wine.
As do I. That makes two of us. Yeah. Well, is it wine o'clock where you are? I've got myself a very small glass of white. That's going to get me through this conversation, but very interested to talk about what you're doing down there. You, your father, Darry Osborn, such a rich family history there. And I guess every story has a beginning. This podcast being all about wine stories of illustrious wine families. I'm wondering if you can take me and the listeners as far back as you can and sort of take us through that family history up to your father, the impact you've had, the direction you've taken the winery in, and going into the future. I've done a little bit of sleuthing around, and cool family history. I mean, the Richmond Football Club, I think your family was involved in the first motor car in the McLaren Vale, stories of incognito horse riders and horse races, things going on here and there. Where can you start?
All right. So why don't we start with Richmond? My great-grandfather, who bought the vineyard here many years later, back in the 60s or early 70s, played for Richmond. And 1860s, I'm talking, of course. And Aussie rules football only started in the late 1850s. So, he's right back at the beginning. His family and he moved over to Adelaide, and he played for Woodville for a couple of years. Woodville disbanded, and then he went down to the pub at Norwood Parade in Adelaide and said, let's start a football club, and with two other blokes. And it was the beginning of Norwood Football Club, the Redlegs, which actually we had the Redlegs come down and do a pre-season training. They did some foot treading, and the Redlegs actually did have red legs, foot treading fermenters. But no, I'm getting sidetracked. He wanted the colours to be green and purple, but he got outvoted. The other two said no, red and blue. But he was the first captain, president, and chairman of Norwood for the first 4 years, and they won the first six titles of the finals. They won the first six games of the season, the grand final. But the score of the very first one, final score was 1-0. So they got a point and the other team didn't get anything. So I'm sure it was really riveting watching high competition. But it was a gentleman's game because rugby and Gaelic, whatever, was all too rough. So the Aussie rules one was for business people and doctors and lawyers and whatever, so they didn't get hurt. So that's what I got told. But anyway, he became best mates with Tom Hardy, as in Hardy's Wines. From 1881, he joined Hardy's as treasurer and director of Hardy's. Tom died in 1912, and Dad left Hardy's that same year because Tom had died. So, and bought with a heap of money that he'd made, bought Darrenberg. It was actually called Bundara Vineyards in those days by F.E. Osborn and Sons. So this is my great-grandfather. He had a whole stable of racehorses from 1900 to 1912. He was the biggest race stakes earner in gambling in South Australia every year. Maybe there was other ways he was doing it. He was from a strict Methodist family, and he raced under a different name, actually, not even his real name, to hide it from his parents, basically.
That's awesome.
Which is pretty funny. And my father always said he was a teetotaler, not that my father really knew him, but I doubt whether he was a teetotaler. If you can lie about a whole stable of horses in your name, then I think you would have lied about drinking as well, because working in a winery and being best mates with the winemaker is not going to be very good if you're not drinking. So he bought the vineyard in 1912. He and his son, my grandfather, built the winery in 1927. So 28 was the first substantial vintage. They were doing wine in a small way for years before that, from what I gather. But the substantial winery is still the winery we use today. We just have more little 5-ton fermenters like they had then. They made, originally there were 9, and then they got 17 with a heap of underground vats. They're still all there. We're still using them. And big old woods and whatever, still all in use. We still make our wines the same way, as I say. Like, my father joined the company in 1943. He missed out on going to the war because his father was so ill that he had to come home and work the land, and there was no one else to do it, so he didn't fight in the war. He's 95 last week, so he's getting on. Still goes to work every day. Still living on his own and driving, having a good time. Still, well, maybe not quite as good fun as when he was maybe carrying on with my mother. But anyway, but he saw a lot of changes. There was no power. There was no tractors. The very first Booth's, Ellis Booth wine transport, one of the very first jobs that Dad did was to pump wine from barrels into a 1,000-gallon upright on the back of a old bean truck that went up to Penfolds. So we were selling the bulk wine to Penfolds in 1943. And that was the very first bulk wine transport that was not just a heap of barrels going up there. And now, of course, it's a massive, big company, the Ellis Booth. So, yeah, he's seen a lot of changes. The Cube was Darren Cube was a little bit of a hard run to get his head around, but he has congratulated me and does actually quite think it looks very beautiful now. So he thought it was going to be very ugly being so contemporary compared to all the old stone buildings, but he's all right. I started working for the company at the age of 7, and I got paid 10 cents an hour in the holidays. I don't think I was worth that much money. I think I ate more grapes than I put in the bucket. But at 8 years old, I got a wage rise to 30 cents an hour, and I thought that's not bad money. So I worked pretty much all my holidays for all of my life in the winery. And it's funny, all the vineyard. So it's sort of quite funny because I actually say I've never worked anyway. I'm actually still on holidays the whole time. So it's and I haven't clocked up a holiday, even though I do go away a bit. But I'm always working because I'm selling wine. So therefore, I still haven't clocked up a holiday. I don't think my father's ever clocked up a holiday either in his holiday pay. But anyway, I'm getting sidetracked. I've finished school in 1979 or 1980 because I repeated physics and chemistry at night school, and I did a degree in winemaking. 81 to 83, finished that, and then became chief winemaker from there. I went overseas with Joe Grilly from Primo Estate and another wine buyer, Eddie Smith, for 6 months. We went round France mostly, but northern Italy, northern Spain and Germany, looking at 4 wineries a day, which was great. And I did that in 84 because Dad had Doug Collett, who was helping him in the winemaking after vintage, helping him out here, so I could actually get away and leave them to do stuff they had to do. But when I came home, then we bought Doug out. He had a little shareholding in one of the companies, and that's it. I've been there ever since, I suppose.
If I can ask a quick question, on that point. So I read that about you. You graduated from wine school, you went to Europe, you came back, and bam, you were the chief winemaker. In terms of that preparation, I mean, had all the time you spent getting paid 10 to 30 cents in the vineyard, had that prepared you? Did you have this intimate knowledge of the winery, the vines, etc., so that you could sort of fluidly just step into that role? Or to me, that sounds kind of incredible that from professional services background, you go straight from university into a massive role with such responsibility. Like from your perspective, how difficult was that? Was there an enormous responsibility attached to that? I mean, with a winery as reputable as yours, that would have been huge.
I certainly respected Dad's opinion to do that. He was on the accreditation committee of Roseworthy College, turning it from a diploma into a degree. And he believed that it was a really great course. And I think he probably thought I knew a lot more than I really did. And all of those years that I'd worked in the winery and the vineyard, were only giving me the practical side of the manual work, what happens, not really winemaking, because you weren't really tasting the grapes and going, oh, look, the season's like that and this season's like that, therefore the grapes taste different, and turning them into wine and getting that flavour. None of that I knew. And so really when you come out of Rosewood, you really don't know what you're doing. And I'd worked at Hardy's at Chateau Ranella in 1983 for vintage. I'd done vintage in Tullocks up in the Hunter Valley in 80 and 82 as well, before, outside of the course. And so I'd had a bit more practical knowledge of other places, what they do. So the white wine, my father really was not making white wine professionally. He was making them, but he was fermenting them on skins. And Palomino and Pedro and Doradillo fermented on skins for a little bit, and then finished in tank, which is really orange wine, I suppose, natural wine now, is what he was sort of making. But they weren't very popular. And so when I came home, I introduced clean technology and yeast and refrigeration and all of those sorts of understandings. But one thing that my father hadn't done is built a big winery while I was still just learning the ropes. A lot of people were buying the big cement mixers, the roto fermenters, and he didn't do any of that because he thought it might not be the right thing to do. So when I came home, we were still just old-fashioned basket presses and little 5-ton fermenters, submerged cap. And I didn't know what to do, so I just left it as it is because, it worked for Dad. He'd made some great wines, many great wines, won a lot of awards through the 70s and got great acclaim and 60s. And so I thought, well, we'll just keep doing what we're doing. I'll just watch what I'm doing. And we just kept buying more fermenters. And I introduced foot treading about 20-odd years ago. They all get foot trod once through the fermentation process. And more gentle crushers. I've went to a Demoiselle, so we had an old beta crusher, which has got these big paddles that fly around a million miles an hour and smash everything to oblivion. The lizards get turned inside out and everything. Lizards, sitting on a post getting caught. I've actually got one here somewhere. I don't know. Oh, there it is. Yeah, this is what they are: bearded dragons, and they're flatter than this. And that's even before they go through the rollers of the crusher. That's not the noise they make. But I've got a wine called the Lucky Lizard because the new crusher was more gentle, and the lizards go through the crusher and come out alive. But that's the Demoiselle, considered by the French to be the softest crusher in the world. I put that in 87. But then in 2009, I put in a even softer crusher, a velo, modified velo that we made even softer. And that really was softer. And so each time I changed the crusher, it made a major change to the wine style. And so really soft crushers. Now, we can leave the grapes in contact with this, the juice and the skins till dry, till they're nearly finished fermentation, 3 weeks, and not get excessive tannins. And even the Demoiselle was breaking stalks and seeds, bruising seeds, and I was getting 20% more tannin because of those. And it's stalk tannin and seed tannin, which doesn't ever open up into fruit keratin. So now I'm just getting skin tannin, which will be more restrained fruit keratin down the track. Opening up means that the wines that we're making have a little bit more elegance and more perfume, more real fruit keratin that lasts for a long time. So the wines I make today, like I did a podcast yesterday with a whole of people in America, and they were drinking the 2010 Dead Arm and the 2017 Dead Arm, and they just said, the 2010 looks like it's only 1 or 2 years old, like it's going to live forever. And I said, yeah, it'll be 40, 50 years, no problem at all. That's the style we make nowadays. And gradually I taught myself all of the winemaking from just tasting the grapes. I spend like 4 or 5 hours a day in the vineyard. We've got lots of growers, we've got lots of vineyards, 500 acres of vines that we own, and then another 500 we buy from, lots of little growers. And so I'm tasting grapes and work out exactly when to pick them and what we should be doing in the vineyard. And you can see it exactly. You know exactly what sort of wine you're going to get to a degree in the vineyard. And then, of course, tasting it through while it's on skins, to pull it off skins at the right time, and then tasting every barrel and whatever. But But yeah, so you basically you have to teach yourself winemaking. You can listen to what people do and you can trial things, but it's trial and error. And a lot of people plunge fermenters instead of submerged cap. We're all submerged cap, but I have done plunging before. Lots of times I've trialed it, and the submerged cap was always the better wine than the plunging when we did it. So I've maintained that because the many trials I've done it, it's the better way. One of the reasons why the submerged cap is so good and why our style ages and all of this is, of course, old vines, great vineyards, picking them not too ripe. All of those things are important if you want a wine to live for a long time. The foot treading, once giving, and this slow extraction is very much like a solvent extraction rather than a mechanical extraction. So, if you're plunging, you're grinding skins and seeds twice a day, and that's mechanical. You're going to get a lot of solids. You're going to bruise the skin and the seed. Whereas we've got these submerged cap, the berries are just all whole berries at the beginning. And as the CO2 forms, it pushes up on the berries and squashes them, and the juice oozes out, solvently extracting all the flavour out of the skin slowly all day long for days, And then when we press it, the basket press is sort of 4 foot by 4 foot sort of size, and it filters quite a bit of the juice. So when we put it in the barrel, there's really not much solids because we haven't been breaking up the skins much, and we've filtered them in the basket press anyway. And so it's just a thin layer of pulp and yeast, and the pulp will give more minerality, giving more ageability, and the yeast will give more oxidative stability because the barrel is oxidative. So we're gobbling up the oxygen by the yeast there, even though they're dead, they still scavenge the oxygen. So it's a good preserving factor. And you get some other little complexities developing that give slight bits of reduction. And a wine that has a slight amount of reduction will age a lot longer because it combats the oxidation. And that's all the rage, in Chardonnay right now. The latest rage of Chardonnay is picking early and having a lot of reduction. Like they're really stinky, smelly, smoky-like notes of reduction is all the rage. And those wines will last for a long, long time because it's that reduction that's going to stop the oxidation. So in red, it can work too. But you only notice a whiff of it when you first start drinking it, maybe sometimes, and then it's gone. So it doesn't interfere with the enjoyment.
Okay, so I note that when you took over as head winemaker, you really sort of seemed to change the direction of the ship in favor of more traditional methods. And fast forward a few years, you guys are certified organic biodynamic, really taking more traditional methods on. I think you've just alluded to a lot of the reasons why you did that. But was that a really dramatic period in the history of D'Arenberg? Was that a difficult thing to do? Or was it just you really had this instinct that this is the future of winemaking and that's what we need to do?
So I trialed organics and biodynamic viticulture back in 2002 and 3 and 4. I did 3 different vineyards where I did 3 or 4 rows one way and alternated all through the vineyard. So that was proper trial. And I found that the biodynamic made a wine that was a little bit more earthy, a little bit more mushroomy, a little bit fuller, but a little less mineral driven, a little bit less fragrant length because of the complexity of the earth and the mushroomy sort of like full flavour. So I didn't really decide to go down that road until I bought the new crusher in 2009, and we found that, as I mentioned, we were getting more skin tannin, so more minerality and a little bit more elegant wines. So by giving them a little bit more earthy mushroom, full of flavour and more complexity at the end, it just made a better balance and worked. It worked for the crusher that we've got now. And so we're the largest biodynamic grower in Australia, actually, with 500 acres of biodynamics being practiced. And McLaren Vale is the sort of king of organic and biodynamic viticulture. There's more, I think it's like 15% of growers are doing organics and biodynamics, and so that's enormous. I think the next closest region has like 1% or 2%. that's a substantial region. So that's because we can in McLaren Vale, because we get in the rain shadow of the summer storms. So, Queensland might have a cyclone or whatever, and the tail of it will come down into South Australia, northern South Australia, the hot, moist air, and hit the cool air and dump summer storm on the grapes, which, when it's doing organics, that can be a real problem. And then it comes further south, and then it hits the Adelaide Hills region, which is northeast of us. And Adelaide Hills is high altitude, so it sucks the clouds dry, and we're in the rain shadow of that. And so we don't get the summer storm. So 2011, everyone said, was a horrible year. No one could have made a wine that tasted any good. Well, we didn't have it. We didn't get that rain. We got 2 inches, and that's, we hadn't had any rain for 6 weeks. So that's that's good irrigation. And then we got another 2 weeks later, we got another 2 inches spread over 4 days. That was about halfway through vintage as well at that stage. So yeah, the 2011s are lovely wines because it was a relatively cool year for us, and there was not dilution. So we still got away with organics and biodynamics that we were starting in those days. It still worked. So we were very very comfortable. But yeah, the whole region actually has a lot of unique stories. Maybe I could go down that road. Because we're on the sea, of course. So the region extends about 15 kilometres along the sea and about 15 kilometres inland. It is a triangle. In fact, I've got a map here for anyone who's looking, and you can see the sea is over here, and these are mountains here, up through here, and the Southern Mount Lofty Ranges, which is Adelaide Hills region. And these are all the geologies. There's lots and lots of different geologies, 40 different geologies in McLaren Vale. It's a very complex story. So we get the cooling sea breezes. Darrenburg's in the middle of McLaren Vale, pretty well right in the middle, and in the hills, Hadley part. And we get a cooling sea breeze at like 3 o'clock. And then as the sun is setting, and it's been on all of South Australia, as the sun sets, the hot air rises and sucks in all the cold air from the sea, from the south, which is, the Southern Ocean is to the south here as well. So we're at the top end of the peninsula, and we get a lot of wind coming from down off of all the hills, flying down through all the valleys and up over the hills where we are, and can't get out to the Gulf because there's wind from pressure from there. So it blows up over the hills, and the temperature drops fast. And then the night, it all settles at 9 o'clock, all the wind and whatever often. And the cold air drainage down through the valleys is really quite cold off of the Adelaide Hills, Mount Lofty Ranges. And so that makes for really interesting diurnal variation. So in the height of summer, we'll be having, like right now, we're having 25 to 30 degrees, and the nights are 14. Or 12 even sometimes, and so it's quite good for being a maritime, as in close to the sea region. We actually have quite high diurnal variation. But the other really quirky thing about McLaren Vale for this is that as we get into autumn and of course spring, then and winter is actually very mild because we're top end of the peninsula, and we don't have snow. We very rarely have any frost problems. And so it means that we can ripen late vintages no problem, because the vines don't suddenly have to shut down or the leaves fall off as it gets cold, and we don't have frost in the morning, and we have an early bud burst. We bud burst before the Riverland does, but we ripen after the Riverland. But so yeah, it has all these really unique things about McLaren Vale that make it a great growing region.
Mm-hmm. I want to ask you about good times and hard times. Wine being a form of farming sort of comprises ebbs and flows. And you and your father, both extremely decorated. You've come on, taken the helm, star-studded, your resume, all the awards you've received, both personally and in terms of your winemaking ability, just incredible. But what have been the challenges for you? And maybe even if you could take that further backwards, some of the tough times throughout the entirety of the history of Darrenburg that sort of shaped it into what it has become today.
Well, yeah, if you go before me, there was always hard times. We built the winery. Bought the vineyard, and then World War One happened, and then the Great Depression. We built the winery, and the Great Depression started straight away, and was the depression for many years, and there was no money ever. Dad remembers just going to school with lard sandwiches and with just dripping, and a pair of the shoes that he'd had for 3 years with his feet all sort of like squashed into them because he was told by his father not to kick any rocks because they're the only shoes he's going to have every time he got a new pair of shoes. So, yeah, he grew up. It was very tough, everything, and they grew their own vegetables, had their own cow, and chickens, and everything. You couldn't rely on having any income, so it was really tough for him. Obviously, it was a bit easier for me in the era because Dad was, the winery was really up and going, and he was making a good success of it. So it was easier times. But I had my own challenges because I was Asperger's. And I had speech impediment, dyslexia as well. Still have all these things, but learned to live with them properly. And actually, Asperger is actually a very beneficial thing to have in today's society because you get such into the detail. You love the detail of things, and so you actually can be really helpful. So, yeah, when I first started making wine, when I was in charge, I remember after about 3 years going, well, this white wine's pretty easy. I was doing really well with white wines. But then I went, oh, this is a lot harder. I really don't know whether I'll ever get this. I remember saying that to myself. I don't know whether I'll ever get this, and then I just looked at it harder and harder, and eventually it all comes to you, you can see what you should be doing. So, but it's a self-training thing, really is what it is. And hard times along the way. Well, I wanted to expand the business back in the 1990s when the export boom all started to happen. Of course, other hard times, the Vine scheme in 1985, that's the reason I came home, actually, in 83, the end of 83, is because it was a really hard time. The government ended up paying people to pull out vines. That's how much of a problem there was, oversupply, and the price of grapes was so low, and cooperatives had advantage price-wise because they were not paying for their fruit. It was very difficult. So Dad said I had to come home, or else there may not be a winery to come home to in those days. But the 90s, of course, was all the big export boom, and that was a great time to be in. And I remember when I came home in 84, I said, I wish I was born earlier and I could have made use of the big boom of the 60s, but it was nothing compared to the big boom of the 90s for export. So I was actually it was strategic timing for me, really. And I worked the market overseas a lot, going overseas into all the trade fairs and working America hard. And we set up 90 countries with distribution, and that. So it was a great period through that whole 90s. And Dad never wanted to grow that fast. It was all too much for him, he said all the time. And I'd say, all right, well, and my sister lives in Sydney and sells wine in Sydney along with other people's wines. And I said to Dad, all right, well, if we're not going to grow so fast, I'll ring up Jackie and tell her we're going to cut the amount of wine that she has in half because, Dad doesn't want to grow. So shall I tell her to do that? And so I tell all the customers that we're not going to give them much more wine. They all want more wine. What do you think we should do? And then he went, well, I suppose we better keep going. And so, well, we planned it all. We had a huge, 5-10 year plan, and we stuck to it. It was actually worked exactly as we wrote it, which is surprising because usually things don't go exactly as you plan. But with the money wise, the growth and everything all happened as they planned. But and I suppose there's always in the last years, we've lost China, of course, pain in the neck. We have also had ups and downs with export going down. Australia not being the flavour of the month or flavour of the years in America and other countries. It made it much tougher for all of us, and the oversupply of grapes because of that. Really, exports going down for everyone. It was tough but we had a very good established marketplace, and we did well. We didn't lose much ground, and even when we've lost China, which was 11% of our volume, 20% of our dollar turnover, and 30% of our profit, when we lost that during COVID, people drank more of Darabird, and they drank more because of people going home, picking up a wine and drinking it at home. They buy a $30 wine. If they were out to a restaurant, they would have bought a $30 wine, but that $30 wine would have been a $10 retail wine. And so now they're buying $30 wine, still spending the same amount, but getting a much better wine. So that suited us perfectly because we're a premium winery. So our sales went up even more than what the China amount that we had. And we had price rises right at the very beginning of COVID, which was perfect timing because who give a damn about price rises when there's COVID everywhere? And so we pushed all of our wines over the $20 barrier. We went from 19 up to 23 and from 28 to 32, and so that's a big call when you do that to all your products. And that sales went up. So we've been fortunate. It's been very the crystal ball's been good.
Mm-hmm. And what can I ask you? What is it like being at the helm of such a large company? So, as you said, you've been involved in a lot of the international efforts to push the label and the brand overseas, and you've hit a number of family milestones along the way, massive anniversaries that you've celebrated in terms of the family winery. Is that all as fun as it sounds? Or I imagine there's a lot of hard work in there. I remember reading, I think it was one of your big family anniversaries where there was like a number of different festivals that were held all over the world in America, Canada, etc. And I'm sort of thinking, this sounds like one massive wine party to me. I mean, I'm sure it's a lot harder than that, but can you take me through a little bit of what's involved in the day-to-day role of running a place like Darabird?
Well, yeah, there's a lot to keep your head around. There's 79 products that I'm making, wine products. Of course, we also bought Settlers Spirits and Ocean Spirits, so we've got another 20 distillation products that I'm in charge of as well, and lots of things in the pipeline for new products and whatever. Yeah, I have a plan all the time and know what we should be looking at each week, and it all seems to come together quite nicely. I've got people obviously helping me. I basically start blending in August. Of course, the whites will blend straight after vintage, the Riesling and Sauvignon, and then reds I'll start doing in August. The old the 1.5-year-old reds, and I'll blend. I'll have 150 to 200 glasses set up in a room every 3 times a week. So they'll be poured at 8:30, and I start tasting at about 10:30. Usually takes about 3 or 4 hours to get through that many glasses. And they've all been airing for a long time. It's like 5 or 6 hours of been sitting out there. So anything that is broad and fatter will be falling over, and anything that is tight and leaner will be just opening up. And so that's the style that I want to make. That's the ones that age for a long time. So that sort of works in the system. So and I really only finish blending in next week will be when I finish. So I do all of the Pinot and Grenache and Mourvedre when it's about 10 or 11 months old, and the Shiraz Viogniers and whatever. And so there's a system all for that. Of course, there's always lots of other management things that pop up that we've got a team of managers that we have management meetings. We've got sales and production meetings every month to go through product by product to make sure we're not missing anything and that we're getting everything ready for the next one coming out and bottling program. So it's all pretty well organised, all quality assurance systems. We sell to a lot of international customers that all need auditing stuff done, and so that's all at hand, and that helps to make sure that nothing slips through. And so it's all fun, really. I just find it fun. It's like a big jigsaw puzzle, and I'm just making mud pies, really, and it's the same ingredients: soil, water, and sun makes mud pies, and makes grapevines, makes grapes as well, and so, I'm still just making mud pies. Just people pay for them now.
And family, that's something that's very important to me. I'm imagining it's something that's quite important to you, given that you've made the decision to, carry on the family's legacy. What's that like? You've referred to, everybody that knows anything about Darrenberg would know your father. You've said that your sister's involved in the family business. You've got this history going back a long, long time in the McLaren Vale. What does that mean to you, having this continual family narrative that you're a part of and you're now kind of steering, I guess you could say?
Yeah, look, family's really huge to a 4-generational company. I mean, it's one lifetime is really not long enough to really understand everything in wine, I don't think. And so the generations, it's a really important thing. And obviously the next generation, my 3 daughters, it'll be great for them to fathom how, put it all together when I start getting a bit too old. All 3 daughters are studying winemaking, actually. 2 of them are 1.5 years through, and the other one's just starting this year. So they're all going to fight over who's going to be the winemaker, I'm sure. Or they could all do different parts of the winemaking, or maybe one will be a distiller, one might want to focus on the management or export, or one might be viticulture. I don't know. There's so many facets to the company that it'll be better if they do all specialise in an area instead. And but yeah, we're also one of the AFFW. You may have heard, Australia's first family of wine group. There's group of 10 wineries like Tabilk and Tyrrell's and McWilliams. There was one. Well, they've been bought out, of course, so they've gone. So there's only 10 now. Taylor's and Jim Barry Wines. And anyway, there's Yalumba. That's another one. Henschke. So we're all we call ourselves Australia's first family wine, just because we're all multi-generational wineries with substantial, iconic sort of wines and old vineyards and whatever. And so that's been a huge family. It's like another whole family that we're all members of, that we get together. And the next generation have really embraced that and have made really close friends with, because they all have the same problems and issues to discuss as what any wine family would have. So family's been really emphasised partly because of that.
Mm-hmm. And you would describe it as a collegiate environment? I mean, you've just said that you all work together and you all share ideas, whereas I can imagine in a lot of other industries, there'd be a lot of competition. There'd be a lot of trying to one-up each other, especially when you're creating a product that you want to, hit that top shelf on the market. So everybody gets along and everybody's really supportive of each other. Is that sort of what you're saying?
Yeah, and I think the AFFW were set up as a more export-oriented thing. So it's like Australia versus the rest of the world. So we're like a family in that sense, and that we're all working on the same goal, really, for that. We have utilised it in Australia as well, and we don't see it as being we're competing against each other. We see it as strength in numbers. Having 10 means that we've got a richer story to tell and emphasise the fact that Australia has a lot of history in wine and some great wines that have been going on for many generations.
Mm-hmm. Okay. I want to spend a little bit of time talking about Chester Osborn, the person. So you're a larger-than-life character. You wear these incredible shirts. You've got a fascination and a love for art. You designed the Cube. What do you do when you're not winemaking? What are your hobbies? What are your interests? I mean, you've told us about art, but what are some interesting facts about Chester Osborn that people may not know?
Well, yeah, I mean, it's pretty obvious that I drink great wine. And we're going to do that all the time. I've got a great cellar, which I started buying years ago, great wines from around the world. And I've collected so many that it means that whenever I go anywhere, I take like a dozen bottles of great European or Australian wines, and then everyone is very happy. Unfortunately, a lot of my friends say that I've ruined them because they can't drink average wine anymore, and they have to spend a lot of money now to buy wines that they can actually get down their throat, without being put off. So yeah, but. Art is a huge part. I go to art galleries every weekend normally. maybe not in the last few months, just COVID and whatever, a little bit less. But and well, I suppose a lot of art galleries haven't been open much anyway, haven't been doing much. But I buy a lot of weird things from auctions, secondhand stuff, and garage sales to make art. As I say, that's what probably most of my time is spent outside of the winery, is actually making sculptures with junk pieces of stuff put together to tell the stories. So there's that. We've got a clothing label, which I mentioned, Beaker's Twisterous, it's called. It's about to start. That's been a long program. We've also started a jewelry, my partner and I, a jewelry store called Vintage Nutcracker Jewelry. So, and we've got high-end jewelry, and it's in the Darrenburg Cube. So when you come and visit, you can buy jewelry, and I'm selling it at very reasonable prices. And so it's called Vintage Nutcracker Jewelry because you're up there drinking vintage wines, and then you think, oh my God, I better buy that. That's an amazing ring for that price, whatever. And then you get home, and you go, oh God, I've cracked my nuts over that. So it's Vintage Nutcracker Jewelry. So, but there's actually 20 old vintage nutcracker, little nutcracker people, all around the display of all the jewelry. So that's really, it's double meaning, really. It's a
little bit more about you. As we've discussed previously, there's a myriad of different achievements you've achieved over the course of your personal career, your wine career. Is there one that stands out to you as the most special moment in your wine life?
It's hard. Every time you're winning the best wine of the show, or winemaker of the year award, it's always great. They're the best times, I suppose. And when Robert Parker put me in his group of most influential wine people in the world, that was really an honour to be selected that way. And but that's just all ego stuff talking. I mean, really, the fun part is going out in the vineyard and starting vintage. The beginning of vintage and all of vintage is the best time of your life. It's just so good. Seeing those flavours developing and the season, and you're riding the season day by day, the weather, and you're adjusting everything because of the way the weather is, and you're always got this feeling that it's going to be the best vintage ever. It's sort of like you have this really. I'm a very positive person, so I always think it's going to be great. We're going to make great wines, even if it's trying. But it's you always do end up sort of making great wines. So I suppose I was right. But that's really where the huge joy is, and then blending. Every time I start, I have to taste. As I mentioned, 150 barrels. That's a real joy. I'm really excited about going in there and tasting all these and seeing what flavours we're getting out of those vineyards. I do them blind, so I don't know the vineyards, and then have a look at what they are. And you can usually guess what the vineyard is, because they all have the unique statements of character that they do, especially because we haven't fertilised for 20 or 30 years. Then the vineyard geology really speaks, and the sense of place, if it's south facing versus north, and the soil that might be on top of the geology, all of these things and the age of the vines. The older the vines, the more you'll see the geology express itself, like it'll be earthier and irony and sooty and exotic tannins, depending on the site. It'll be different each time, depending on what's underneath. So that's all the exciting thing, is just how much you can learn and expanding. New products. We've got new varieties coming out all the time. It's a lot of fun creating new products and new varieties and seeing new flavors and people getting excited by them. So it's never ending. I know all the people in the company always wonder when it's ever going to stop. They just think it's just like this train ride we're on, but no, it won't ever stop.
I've got just a couple more questions for you. You've been so generous with your time. The first one being, so I've just asked you about the most special what is it that you enjoy most about wine? And you've given me a very interesting answer to that. The second one is going to be, are you able to identify a wine that you have had over the course of your life that made the biggest impression on you? Was there one in your early days that you had and you just went, that's it, I'm going to be a winemaker? Or is there one you had more recently? Like, is there a wine that just punched you in the face and, said, this is heaven?
Well, Dad always used to have people around and we'd drink a lot of his wine and other people's wine. But the 63 Burgundy he made, which we now call Darry's Original, which was 25% Grenache and 75% Shiraz, was, I think, the most impressive wine that he made and still can drink beautifully today. It's a lot of years later now, 60 years later nearly. That's always been a very impressive wine to me. I had the most impressive wine, I suppose, I've had two wines maybe I've had with a 1922 Burgundy from Beaune, a Paul Bouchard selection, Hospice de Beaune wine. And that was extraordinarily fresh still and beautiful and long. And then one of the greatest wines I ever had was a Barbaresco from 1967, a very small winery that only ran for like about 10 years. And I was with the son of the owner who opened the bottle, and it was just amazingly fresh and long. And again, 60 years, 50 years old it would have been when I had it. Those two are probably the two most interesting wines, but millions of interesting wines I've had.
Okay. My final question for you, Chester, is, so from a consumer perspective or somebody that wants to come and get the most out of your wines, what are some tips you have for people to get the most out of their wine drinking experience?
Certainly Darrenberg red wines, they really only start to perform at peak at about 8 years of age, and then can stay at that peak for many, many years, 40, 50 years for many, many vintages because of the way I make it nowadays. And so that's going to be the most enjoyment that anyone could have. Of course, you can drink them young as well, but making age-worthy wines that don't show age is really the key to great wine. Even though today, the consumer and the shows all want 6-month-old wines win all the trophies nowadays. It's just sort of a bit ridiculous actually, bottling reds at 6 months old and they're big Beaujolais sort of thing. But there is still a significant amount of people who really want style and structure and sense of place. You'll get earthiness, you'll get a lot of length, you get a lot of complexity from our wines that have a certain European-like nature to them, a certain elegance but power at the same time, and a lot of minerality or tannins that are age-worthy and have fruit restrained inside them that'll open up years later. So that's sort of what to look for in the reds. And the whites, a lot of people don't realise, but our whites are very popular too, and we do a great job with Chardonnays and Sauvignon and Viognier and Marsanne and Fiano and whatever. All these and a lot of people often say, Darrenberg's really known for reds, but your whites are great too. They say that's sort of a bit astonished to me, but I suppose younger people probably aren't as biased as that, and they could easily be into the whites too.
Okay. Chester Osborn, it's been absolutely phenomenal, a pleasure, an honour, a privilege having you on my show today. Can't thank you enough. Wish you all the best with your work moving forward. You're at the helm of a phenomenal winery with a really rich family history. Doesn't get much better than that. Thanks again for joining me on the show.
Anytime, Tom, and when you can travel, come and have a gander over here. We'll have a drink over here.
I can't wait. I look forward to meeting you face to face in the Cube and seeing some of that awesome artwork you've got. Thanks again.
All right. Cheers. See ya.
Chester Osborn is somebody who believes in attention to detail and the art of fine winemaking. Thank you, Chester, for joining me.